Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We obviously met with the governor and received his offer on transportation. Was that yesterday? Every day seems like a week right now. So we spent the day yesterday talking with our caucus and members and realized that we need to find true compromise. And we have put together a plan that we will show the governor this afternoon, which we believe is true compromise. And the reason I say that, half of the proposal that we're giving him are our ideas, and half of it is his ideas, okay? So we are proposing to use $300 million in existing resources out of the $900 million surplus towards roads and bridges. And on the governor's half, we're proposing a license tab fee adjustment, which is a much scaled back version of what the governor proposed yesterday. Under this proposal, no one would pay more, and more than half of the cars on the road would pay less for their license tabs, but it would pick up about $100 million of revenue for us that we can use towards roads and bridges. And then the last piece of that is $200 million in trunk highway bonding. That was in the governor's original proposal. He counted it in his original proposal, and we would pay the debt service within the resources available within the plan. This puts more than $6 billion into roads and bridges, real $6 billion spent on roads and bridges over the next 10 years. Our caucus wasn't necessarily happy about coming up with the reform on tabs, which would put some additional revenue in, but we realize that compromise is what's needed, and that's why we're proposing this today. In addition to that, we are also going to lay out proposed targets, budget targets for the joint conference committees, and those are as follows, and they are also in your sheet. We are proposing $450 million of tax relief this year. That would be $500 million in the tails. Our priorities for that tax relief would be middle class tax relief. We'd like to do something for Social Security recipients and veterans in exempting or starting to phase out an exemption of their benefits, student loan debt and college savings accounts, property tax relief for farmers, and the dependent care credit. So those would be our priorities to fit within that bill. Roads and bridges, we're proposing $300 million in the current biennium and $550 million in the tails, which this plan does fit within that framework. In the supplemental spending, we're proposing $65 million in 2017 and $100 million in the tails. In bonding, we are proposing a zero target, which, if you haven't caught that yet, is consistent with the forecast, and the forecast suggests that we would have enough debt service to cover an $800 million bonding bill. We will put out an $800 million bonding bill tomorrow. It will be in committee tomorrow, and we will move it through the process thereafter. And then this plan leaves, Healthcare Access Fund, we're proposing joint targets of zero. We don't think we should take any money out of the Healthcare Access Fund and use it elsewhere. So we are proposing to take zero out of the Healthcare Access Fund. I'll remind you that the governor is proposing to take about $500 million out of the Healthcare Access Fund between this year and the tails. Excuse me. Our plan would leave $65 million on the bottom line in 17, and that would roll over into 18-19, which would leave about $73 million on the bottom line at the end of 18-19 with the 17 surplus. So with that,
I would just add that we're very excited. We enjoyed meeting with the governor and the Senate and getting a better understanding of some of their priorities, and we feel this is a very good compromise. It still puts our priorities first, which we believe are the priorities of Minnesotans, and that is additional dollars into roads and bridges using existing funds and the compromise language of that the governor wanted, as well as middle class tax relief. And so we're very happy to put together this compromise package. We think it's a great package for all the state of Minnesota, and we hope that the governor and the Senate Democrats will accept our proposal.
Add one more thing. I forgot one piece. You'll notice here that we are not dealing with transit. Further, as part of our offer and proposal to the governor, is let's focus on roads and bridges first. and separate transit from roads and bridges. Let's see if we can get to agreement on the road and bridge piece first. I think that's everyone's #1 priority. If we can get that accomplished, then let's work on the transit. So we're suggesting that those be separated. Anyone else want to add anything in on your pieces? Otherwise, we can take questions.
Mr. Speaker, can you explain how the TAB formula reform raises $100 million if nobody pays anymore?
Well, it could work that maybe if you paid $100 this year and you were scheduled to pay $75 next year, maybe you'd pay $83 next year. So you won't pay more than you're currently paying. There will be a hold harmless clause. People will only jump in at the higher rate as they buy new vehicles. I think the highest that anybody could see an increase would be, and this is a small percentage, the highest anybody could see would be about 25% increase in what they pay in tab fees. That's the worst case scenario. Most people would see $10 or less probably. And I'll remind you that what we're doing is we're lowering the base fee in this new formula. So more than half of the cars on the road will pay less for their tabs under this proposal than they do currently pay.
But it looks like, according to your schedule, most cars would cost $40 more through year 10 of age of vehicle.
No, we're look at year 11. We're lowering the minimum fee. So in the 11th year, where people were paying $35, they'd now be paying $30, and that transfers to everybody else. So more than half of the cars on the road would see a reduction in their tab fee.
Would the $200 million in bonding continue just to renew every year then in this $600 million plan? Would the $200 million from bonding, would that just be renewed each year then for 10 years?
That actually was a piece that was in the governor's original proposal, and it wouldn't automatically renew, but it would. You would have enough to authorize another $200 million of trunk highway bonding every year for 10 years. And there's enough debt service, there's enough revenue in this plan or money in this plan to pay the debt service so that with that trunk highway bonding, we'd be spending over $6 billion in real dollars. That was the governor's requirement, that we were spending $6 billion on roads and bridges over the 10-year period. This plan does that. So it would be $200 million of trunk highway bonds every 2 years.
And the $300 million, is that transfers from a general fund then? Or reallocation of general fund money?
We're talking about the general fund money, the $300 million. Yes, that's our transportation stability fund, where we talk about the tax on auto parts, the lease sales tax, and the rental tax.
So is that $300 million going to be applied through the highway user tax distribution fund formula?
Very similar. The transportation stability fund would go to that. Yes.
So under that formula, about 60% of the revenue goes to trunk highway, and about 40% goes to local roads. Does that also apply for the $300 million there?
Correct. So, but in essence, the entire amount is roads and bridges, just like the speaker has said, and that's what most Minnesotans said their priority was for us during this session, and that's why we've attributed that to roads and bridges.
Does any of this come out of the surplus?
The $300 million is.
Do you consider that? So what happens another year when you don't have the surplus?
Well, that's where we've consistently said that from a priority standpoint, people have asked us to prioritize roads and bridges and a long-term comprehensive transportation plan. So if we look at what that number is, it's actually about 1.4% of the entire budget. So to prioritize 1.4% of our total budget to something that the government should be doing and taking care of, we feel that should remain a priority, and that's why we use the dedicated funds in the transportation stability.
So after the budget surplus is gone, if it's gone, then it's 1.4% of general funds would go to roads.
It is part of the budget.
Chair Kelly, how close is this to the deal that everybody thinks you and Chair Dibble have worked out on the back of the napkin?
Well, I think it's consistent with what we've been saying really throughout this 2-year process, is that we understand that we have to compromise, but we also understand that roads and bridges was priority one. So in separating these out, I guess, as the speaker said, we would like to go with what we know, what we believe we have agreement on, and just like the governor came out yesterday, and you saw finally a proposal that did not have a gas tax in it. we see that that was a wonderful move and towards something that we knew from the beginning we didn't have an appetite for. So you're seeing this plan as closer to what I believe the agreement will
Do
end
you
up.
believe the Senate will agree to it, though?
I believe they think this is much more in line with what they expected, I guess.
Does the 200 million come out of Representative Torkelson's 600 million, or are we talking about different kinds of bonds?
We're talking about different kinds of bonds. The 200 million is the trunk highway bond.
And any GO bonds for transportation?
We have proposed 250 of GO bonds, and that is consistent with our 10-year model. So for GO bonds, we're looking at about 1.3 billion in our 10-year plan, and trunk highway bonds is right around $1 billion.
And that will require the legislature to act every year to keep that going in a bonding bill?
If we appropriate the trunk highway bonds, that will be consistent. The GO bonds absolutely are something that each legislature would have to do. But as you can see, the GO bonds are not in this particular plan. When we say 600 million for on an annual basis for a 10-year plan, that completes our $6 billion plan.
Chairman Kelly, how much pushback do you imagine there will be because there's no transit money here?
Well, I'm hoping that there's really not much pushback, because what we're trying to do is break it apart so that we can reach agreement here first, so that we can move on to the transit side. You've still heard us stay consistent here, or myself consistent in regards to a long-term comprehensive transportation package that we have to address transit. So I'm looking forward to having that next conversation after we move past the roads and bridges.
But there's no appetite in the caucus for transit, is there?
Well, I guess we're taking one conversation at a time. We've walked this through, and this is something, as the speaker said, was something that we had to talk about as a caucus. We would like not to have to raise any fees or look at a depreciation schedule, but this is something that everyone sees is the compromise for the roads and bridges that we promised we'd deliver.
Mr. Speaker, could I ask you another question about the tab fees? I may be looking at this incorrectly, but it looks to me like everybody gets a tab fee hike on here, 1 through 10, year 1 through 10. Am I wrong about that?
We would have language in the proposal that would be hold harmless, so nobody would see an increase. If you're paying $100 now and next year you should be paying $120, it would hold you at $100. So we do have hold harmless language in our proposal so that no one would pay more. And again, more than half of the vehicles on the road would pay less than they currently pay under our proposal.
Until,
Their current cars, but they would pay more if they bought a new car.
Correct, that's correct.
and is this a tax hike?
We don't believe so. We believe it's a user fee for our roads. But it does put new revenue into the plan, and I think that's what the governor wanted. It wasn't easy for our caucus to swallow new revenue, but we believe in the spirit of compromise to make sure that we get the roads and bridges funded in a way that I think we all see as appropriate. We are taking a big step today, and this is part of it.
Chair Torkelson, could we get you to come forward and give us a little preview? I believe I heard the speaker say an $800 million bonding bill is coming out tomorrow.
That is correct. The new target is $800 million. We will adjust our target in Ways and Means, I believe, tomorrow morning. And we will, at this point, we're planning on having the Capital Investment Committee meet tomorrow morning. And at that point, we will reveal the bill and have a discussion in the Capital Investment Committee and then pass it on through the process.
Tell us why this higher dollar amount.
Well, it really is what's built into the budget. So the money is already there. It seems like a sensible figure. And yeah, as you all know, bonding bill does require a supermajority, and in order to gain support from the other side of the aisle, we felt we had to increase that number.
And what number will be assigned to transportation projects within that $800 million?
There will be transportation, as there always is within the bonding bill. For local roads and bridges, it'll be more substantial than it's been in the past. I'm not really ready to reveal particular numbers right now.
The $250 million we were just told? Or is it not?
We are negotiating as we speak. Actually, the Democrat lead of the committee is in my office right now looking at the spreadsheet, so I don't have any solid numbers for you, but it will be substantial.
And you're talking to the Democratic lead, or have you talked to Torkelson? You're Torkelson.
I do talk to myself every once in a while.
Have you talked to Thiessen and talked to Stump about this?
I've been meeting with the Senator Stump on issues related to bonding, and right now Representative Hausman is in my office looking at the spreadsheet.
Have you talked to Thiessen?
I talked to him last night.
Did he like this?
I didn't have particulars for him at that time. He seemed encouraged that we're considering a larger number.
Well, Chair Davis, could we have you come forward? I know you're starting talks as well with Senator Skoye. What are the prospects for a tax bill right now?
Well, I think they're looking better every day, and just remember, please don't stop believing. We have a very robust middle-class tax cut bill, and we're going to be trying to hit all ages, from the young through the governor's child care tax credit, up through student loan issues, and then up through, we're looking at veterans and giving Social Security recipients some relief from having to include Social Security income as income and being taxed on it. So so we're going from young to the more elderly and everybody in between. And also, you'll see in the tax bill, I've looked very favorably on most all TIF districts, local option sales taxes, those types of things. Not all of them. There's a few that just don't cut it. And so I've been working very closely with Senator Skoye, and it seems to me that I actually have the easy job here because getting some good tax relief out there on a bipartisan basis for the middle class. I think transportation and bonding, there'll be more time spent there. I'm very confident that Senator Skoye and I will be able to put together a package once we have our final numbers. I have many scenarios that I've been working on this since May because I didn't stop believing. And so I've been working on this since May. And so I have numbers for all sorts of different scenarios. And so they'll be quickly plugged in. There's a few things that we'll have a little discussion on. But I think we're at the point where when we have less than a week left of session where if there's something we both agree on, let's go. If it gets too contentious, just let's set it aside for another time.
You agree on soccer? Same question. Soccer.
We'll be talking soccer. I've made no commitments. They have soccer on the property tax, not on the sales tax on building materials, but we'll be talking soccer.
Speaker Daudt, on the Southwest light rail issue, is there any vehicle you see in the next several days that is going to get the money to that project that will allow federal matching funds?
Obviously, the Southwest Light Rail is the controversial project, and it does not have a single vote in my caucus. So that's been what kind of holds up the transit side of this. My members support our buses, and particularly in rural Minnesota, the buses that seniors use to get to the doctor and to the shopping mall and to the grocery store. We know how needed those modes of transportation are, so we don't want to lump all transit together. But the controversial part of that, obviously, are the trains. We are not supportive of that. We don't think it's a good idea. In fact, most of the emails that I get in opposition to Southwest Light Rail, and I get about 10-1 in opposition as opposed to support, and most of the emails I get in opposition come from the area where the train would actually provide service. So we think that those dollars are much better spent to upgrade our road and bridge infrastructure. And remember, that's a mode that far less than 2% of the population uses our trains, where 98+% of our population uses our road and bridge infrastructure every day as their primary mode of transportation. So I think what we want to do is focus the dollars that we have on the resource that most Minnesotans use and where it can have the biggest impact.
So would you like to kill that project despite the millions that have already been spent on it?
Yes, I would.
What about letting the local people decide, putting it on the ballot?
As far as that train, my guess is that
What kind of train? So the half-cent sales tax for transit.
you know, our caucus is not in favor of that right now, but as I've said, we're willing to have a conversation with the Democrats. But what we want to do, and part of my proposal today, is let's separate transit from roads and bridges. Let's get to agreement on this first. I feel like we need to break the ice and get to agreement on something. We think we're the closest on the road and bridge infrastructure, so let's focus on that first, and then we can talk about the transit piece, which is a little more complicated. But we're certainly willing to talk with them about what we know is their priority.
Mr. Speaker, how do you feel about global negotiations then? You've got your transportation, talking that, you've got taxes, you've got bonding. Is a do-nothing session looking less likely right now to you?
Well, I don't think, even if we ended right now, you could call this a do-nothing session. We've accomplished some great things, and you know, if you look at what we did last year and the funding that we put into K-12 education, you know, it's schools in the state of Minnesota have a 2% and 2% increase both years of the biennium because Republicans pushed for that in negotiations. We put $136 million into nursing homes. We've accomplished a lot of great things.
Transportation taxes, bonding was an issue.
Well, you know, the holdup on transportation has been the gas tax, and it was great to see the governor move off of the gas tax yesterday. He was off of the gas tax last November, but came back onto it. We think that's a big move. We also recognize that the governor is understanding that we need to put some portion of the surplus dollars into our road and bridge infrastructure. Yesterday, he said $200 million in the current biennium and $400 million in the tails. You know, we obviously want to do a little bit more than that, but we're being very reasonable with our proposal, we believe. And we're also recognizing some things that completely on their side of the equation, some things they have proposed in the past as being a way of putting this together.
Globally, though, the big three, what are the odds?
This
they
has
all
been
get
really a different negotiations from last year in particular. We haven't done a lot of negotiating around the table. We've had shorter meetings. I have been pressing to set joint targets. Senator Bach and I both have made public statements that we really want to get the members of the legislature through the conference committee process involved in making those decisions, and I don't think either one of us wants to sit around a table with the governor and negotiate every little detail of every bill. We really want to engage our members and have them work out the details. So what we'd like to do is set a higher level framework and then let the members of the conference committee work out the details of those bills. Now, that's not a perfect scenario. There's obviously some bigger pieces that we'll have to tackle, but we can answer those questions and then let the committee members take over and do their work.
So how close are you on target?
My hope is that we'll have joint targets by the end of today, and I think I talked to Senator Bach a little bit yesterday after the meeting. I think he agrees with that. We obviously, it's not just a matter of transparency. We want the public to be involved in a public process through the conference committee process in deciding how these resources will be allocated. But we also have to take into account that we have to process all of this, so the time it takes for our staff to prepare the bills and draft the bills and those sorts of things, that all takes time too. So I think we'd like to have by the end of today. So I think today, I believe we're meeting with the governor at 2 o'clock and Senator Bach, and I think we're going to just try to push to make progress on the joint targets today. And it's not easy. We're not, you know, just $20 million apart here and there. We're still significantly apart, but I think if we could break the ice and make some good progress on the road and bridge infrastructure, we think this proposal could be the proposal that does that. I think that would be a good start that would set us up for a bunch of other pieces falling in place today even.
Mr. Speaker, could you clarify? I'm a little confused. How would you want the road and bridge discussion concluded before you're ready to talk about transit? I'm just not clear.
Well, if we can get to agreement on how much we're going to put in roads and bridges and what sources it's going to come from, I think that would be a great icebreaker that would get us agreeing on something, and I think we're fairly close. This looks like the area that we're the closest, so that's why my suggestion is let's deal with this first, and then we'll work on the transit piece of it.
Paid leave. Where's your caucus on paid leave now?
You know, I think that's a good question. We are, you know, we did not move a bill in the House. The minority in the House did not offer amendments to discuss that issue on any of our bills, so we have not had an in-depth discussion. I think that has been fairly controversial in the Senate. It's my understanding that they had trouble moving the bill themselves in the Senate. I'm not optimistic that it will become law this year.
Chairman Marble, forgive me if I'm wrong, but it looks like fiscal 18-19, you start with a $1 billion hole in the budget for the next biennium because of the tax relief and roads and bridges coming from the general fund. Am I reading that wrong?
No, Rachel, there's a $1,181 million surplus in details. So basically, when you look at our numbers there, you take off what we've got in tails for taxes, transportation, bonding, a little bit the supplemental bill. I think you're left with, I want to say, $7 or $8 million on the bottom line.
So you start next year basically even if there's a downturn in the economy, we're looking at a deficit.
Well, actually, we carry over, if you look at the 2017 numbers, we carry over $65 million. And then we add a little bit of a cushion of $7 or $8 million beyond that. But one thing that we are not doing that the governor did do is the governor is taking over $500 million out of the Healthcare Access Fund, and then he's saying, well, that's our $500 million cushion on the bottom line. We're not doing that. I mean, if you wanted to count that, then we've got more money than the governor on the bottom line, because we'd have that 500, I think it's 530 million plus another about 70 million there.
Thank you.
Where do the existing, sales taxes on auto leases, auto parts, where does that fit into into your slice of the pie here?
Well, right now it goes into the general fund, and so it's part of the $900 million surplus we've got for 2017, and part of the $1,181 million projected surplus we've got for 18 and 19. So we're just taking it out of that.
Do you plan to put some kind of statutory dedication into transportation funds?
I think that's really a question for Chairman Kelly.
Thank you. Yes, our Transportation Stability Fund is statutorily dedicated to roads and bridges.
Mr. Speaker, you're meeting with the governor and Bach today. Transportation and overall targets on the table?
Yes, yeah, we'll present our transportation offer back to him this afternoon, and then we'll engage in a discussion on overall targets.
And where's this going to be?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be here, but I'm not quite sure.
As in SOB here?
I think so. We've been asking if we, we're obviously in session right now, so it's easier for us if we're not at the residence, if we're here, and can get back to session quickly if need be. So it'll be on the Capitol complex somewhere, but I think it's going to be in this building. So, any other questions? Sounds great. Thank you all.
Thank you.